Okay, let's talk about Australia's housing crisis. It feels, well, impossible, right? But there's this one really controversial argument out there that says the main cause is hiding in plain sight. So today, we're going to unpack that exact argument, piece by piece, to see how it gets to its pretty explosive conclusion.
And it all starts with this one feeling, this one core idea. Australians are getting left in the dust. It's this sense of frustration that everyday Aussies are being left behind in their own country. That's the emotional heart of this whole thing. So, why are people feeling this way? What's the deal? Well, the source material we're looking at today builds a really specific case. Let's follow the breadcrumbs, see exactly how they connect the dots to get to that conclusion. Okay, so the whole argument really hinges on this one specific government program. Now, this thing was supposed to help people buy their first home, but according to this argument, it's having a very, very different effect. All right, so what is this scheme? Here's the breakdown. You know how normally you need a massive 20% deposit to buy a house? I mean, that's a huge hurdle for most people. Well, with this program, the government basically steps in and acts as your guarantor. This means you can get into the market with just a 5% deposit. The key point in this argument, though, is that it's the Australian taxpayer who's shouldering all the financial risk. And this is the number that really fuels the fire for this whole argument, 50,000. The claim is that 50,000 new permanent residents have used this exact taxpayer-backed scheme to buy a home. Now, to back this up, the source points to this Facebook post that apparently went viral and made a lot of people really angry. It appears to show someone planning to use government grants for a home, only to then quickly leverage that into an investment property. So for the people making this argument, this was like the smoking gun. Proof, they say, that the system is being taken advantage of. So from this one scheme, the argument zooms out. It uses this as a jumping-off point to talk about a much, much bigger economic issue, one that it says is the real root of the entire crisis. And here it is. This is the absolute core of the argument. They're saying, look, forget all the complicated stuff. This boils down to simple, basic economics, supply and demand. There are just way too many people and nowhere near enough houses being built. And these are the numbers the whole supply and demand argument rests on. They are pretty dramatic. Just look at that gap. The source highlights that since 2022, there's been a net migration of 1.5 million people. And in that same period, only 322,000 new homes approved. The difference is just huge. And if you think that's bad, the argument goes on to say that the government isn't even meeting its own goals. They set this big target, right? 1.2 million new homes by 2029, but the source claims they're already falling behind month after month. Okay, so if that's the problem, too much demand, not enough supply, what's the real-world impact? This next bit of the argument dives into the real financial pain it's supposedly causing for regular people who are just trying to get on the property ladder. To strengthen its case, the argument brings up a warning that was apparently made way back at the beginning, from the Insurance Council of Australia. It says the counties saw this 5% deposit scheme and immediately raised some big red flags. And this wasn't some vague warning either. It was super specific. They basically predicted that if you pump a bunch of new buyers into a market that's already short on houses, prices could jump by as much as 10% in just the first year. Now, a 10% price hike is huge, right? But here's where the argument takes a turn. It says that prediction, as bad as it sounded, wasn't even close to what actually happened. Because according to the source, the reality was way, way worse. The average loan for a first home buyer didn't just go up by 10%. Nope. The claim is that it shot up by nearly 25% in a single year. That's more than double what was predicted. So what does that 25% jump actually mean in terms of dollars and cents? It means the average loan for a first-time buyer has supposedly swelled to over $600,000. I mean, just think about that. That's an incredible amount of debt to take on, putting insane pressure on a whole new generation of homeowners. And all of this, the economics, the numbers, it all leads to the final part of the argument. And this is where it shifts from just facts and figures to something much more emotional and, frankly, political. This quote right here is used to sum up that emotional toll. It's trying to say this isn't just about money anymore. It's about a feeling of being an outsider in the very country you were born in. And the source ties this directly back to government policies that, in its view, put newcomers ahead of citizens. So let's wrap this up. Here's the final verdict from the source we're examining.
The argument is that Australian citizens are basically at the back of the line, with the government helping big business and new arrivals first. The conclusion? That Australia should be prioritizing its own citizens above all else. And the whole situation is, in a word, a disgrace.
But the argument doesn't just stop at calling it a disgrace. It finishes with this really intense call to action for nothing less than a giant revolution to completely overhaul what it sees as a fundamentally broken system.
Which brings us right back to the central question at the heart of all this. The argument we just walked through, it has a very, very clear answer. But it's the question that really defines this entire debate. In a housing crisis, when things are this tough, who gets help first?